Strong communities, strong communities. The very best places for you and me are strong communities. When we listen, when we share, things always go better. When we show how much we care, we grow strong together. Strong communities, strong communities. The very best places for you and me are strong communities.
Hi, my name is Barry Stewart Mann.
And I'm Deborah Strahorn, and welcome to Storybooks for Strong Communities.
In this series of videos, we're going to be sharing with you some of our favorite stories from children's picture books. Stories that show the importance of being in a community, of supporting other people in your community, of having a strong community around you.
And if you like them, you can find them at your favorite library, or if you really want them, you can purchase them at a local bookstore.
So now it's time for Storybooks for Strong Communities. In any community, there are people who are richer and people who are not as rich. Some people have cars and some people don't. Some people have big houses and some people don't. And for the people that don't have cars, there often is something called public transportation. Buses and trains, like the MARTA buses and trains in Atlanta. Have you ever ridden on the public buses and trains? I have. I always enjoy when I do that. I always enjoy seeing all the people getting on and off. I play a game with myself. I imagine maybe what their lives are like, where they're going, or something special that's happened in their life recently. Well, our first story is about a boy and his grandmother taking a ride on a public bus. It's called Last Stop on Market Street. It's written by Matt de la Peña with illustrations by Christian Robinson. It's a very sweet story about a boy named CJ. And he and his grandmother are getting out of church at the beginning of the story. And they come out of the church and it's just raining a little bit, so his grandma puts up an orange umbrella, his Nana, that's what he calls her. And CJ says, "Nana, why do we have to wait for the bus in the rain?" Because they go and stand at the bus stop. But his Nana just smiles and says, "Oh, CJ, you get thirsty. Well, the trees are getting thirsty too, and this is their way of getting a drink out of the ground." And he looks to try and figure out how the trees are getting that water out of the ground. And then he sees a friend of his that he knows from school getting in a car. And he says, "Nana, why don't we have a car?" And she just says, "Oh, what would we do with a car? We don't need a car. We have the bus. And if we didn't go on the bus, then you wouldn't see Mr. Dennis, who always has a nice trick for you." She was talking about the bus driver that they see every week. And just then, the bus came up and they got on, and lo and behold, Mr. Dennis reached out and he said, "Hi there, CJ." And he pulled a coin from behind CJ's ear. CJ was charmed. Well, he and his Nana sat down. And Nana said good afternoon to all the people on the bus. Oh, it was just such an interesting mix of people. There was a man sitting across from them. They were sitting near the front of the bus, and he had on a hat, and he had a guitar, and he was tuning his guitar. Bing, 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 bing. And then next to them, there was, or a little bit down, there was a woman. She was an old woman, and she had curlers in her hair, and she had a jar with butterflies in it. And next to her, there was a man who was covered with tattoos all over. And then across the way, there was a young woman sitting there in a skirt. And there was an older man with a bald head wearing a suit. And the bus began its journey. Well, as they went, CJ was feeling kind of glum. And he said, "Nana, why do we always have to go here after church? My friends Colby and Miguel never have to go." And she just smiled and said, "Oh, CJ, I feel bad for them. They don't get to go there and see Bobo the Sunglass Man." And they continued going along the way. And then when the bus stopped, a man got on with a dog. The dog had spots on it, and the man was walking slowly with a cane, and he was holding the cane out in front of him. You probably know what I'm describing. He was a man who was blind, and that was his walking stick and his seeing eye dog. And when CJ and his Nana watched the man get on, and the man sat down right next to them, and CJ whispered to his Nana, "Nana, why Is that man blind? Why can't he see? And his Nana said, oh, CJ, some people just like to see the world through their ears. And then the man who had heard, he said, oh, yes, and through my nose, too. Why, that's lovely perfume that you have on, ma'am. And Nana was so charmed that she reached over and pressed the man's hand and squeezed it. And they continued on their way. Well, at another stop, two bigger boys got on, and they both had wires coming out of their ears connected to a device, and they were bopping along listening to music. And CJ looked at them and said, Nana, I wish I had one of those. And she just smiled and said, CJ, why do you need one of those? Why, you've got music right over there across the bus. And she pointed at the man who was tuning his guitar, and she said, why don't you ask him to play a song? But CJ didn't have to ask. The man started picking out a tune on his guitar, soft and gentle. And the blind man leaned over and said, oh, I like to close my eyes so I can really feel the magic of the music. And he closed his eyes. And Nana said, I do too. And she closed her eyes. And so CJ closed his eyes too. And as he did, he could feel the music swelling up all around him. The song was so nice and soft and gentle. It took him in his imagination to a place where he saw waves on the ocean and hawks flying through the air. You could even see those butterflies in the woman's jar, and they were flying free. He just felt himself filled up from his toes to the top of his head with that wonderful, wonderful music. When the music stopped, everybody cheered and applauded. Even the kids who had their earphones, they took their earphones out to listen to the music. And Nana, she reached into her purse and she took out a coin. Oh, they didn't have a lot of money, Nana and CJ, but she pressed it into CJ's palm, and CJ took it over. That man had taken off his hat and put it on the ground, on the floor of the bus, and CJ dropped the quarter into the man's hat. The man said, thank you. But then the bus came to a stop, and the bus driver, Mr. Dennis, called out, last stop on Market Street. Remember, that's the title of the book. And so Nana and CJ climbed down off the bus. They waved goodbye to everyone, and then they started walking down. Oh, the sidewalks were crumbled and uneven. The stores along the way, a lot of them were closed up. There were some broken windows. On the walls, there were words and pictures painted, big designs. And it was kind of dirty everywhere. And CJ said, Nana, why is it so dirty here? And Nana just said, oh, CJ, when you're in a place that's really dirty, it just helps you to really appreciate the beautiful things. And she pointed up. CJ looked up and he saw a beautiful rainbow because it had stopped raining. And the rainbow was right over the building that they were going to, which was what's called a soup kitchen. It's a place where people can go and just get a nice, free, healthy meal. And when they arrived there, they looked in the window and they saw a lot of faces that they knew. Oh, there was a man with a beard, with a cap on. He had a shopping cart with a dog in it. And there was, it looked like a woman who had on a construction helmet and a pink tool case. And oh, there was someone with sunglasses. Maybe that was Bobo, the sunglass man. And CJ said to Nana, you know what, Nana? I'm glad we came here. And Nana said, I am too. And they came into the big room where there were tables and tables with people sitting all around them, eating a nice, healthy meal and sharing stories with each other, talking together, enjoying each other, enjoying community. And that's the story. At the end, we just see a picture with Nana and CJ sitting in a bus stop. I guess they're waiting for the bus home. And she's knitting, and CJ is reading a book. But obviously, they've had a nice, nice meal among the people they know. That's the story, Last Stop on Market Street. You can see it's received a couple of awards. These are very important awards in children's books, one for illustrations and one for the writing. And it is a beautiful book, so I highly recommend that you check and see if you can find it in your library. It's really fun to read. And it reminds us that even in a place that's dirty, even when you don't have a lot, There's a community that can support you, and you can find beauty all around you. And that's what makes a community strong.
Our next story is about how people in the community have different resources. How many pairs of shoes do you have in your closet? When my dad was growing up, he said he only had 3 pairs of shoes. One for school, one for church, and one for outside play. And he had to be very careful because there were 4 children in his family. And even if he needed a new pair of shoes, if he tore his shoes up, it wasn't for sure if his mother and father would be able to afford a new pair. So he had to be very careful. This story is about the difference between needs and wants. And it's about a little boy who learns how to help someone else. This story is called Those Shoes, written by Mary Beth Bolts, with pictures by Noah Jones. Sometimes we want the latest fashion, especially the latest shoes. And Jeremy wanted the latest high tops. They were black gym shoes with 2 white stripes. Sometimes you call them sneakers. Can you say sneakers? Well, Jeremy wanted a new pair of sneakers. It seems like everybody at his school had those black high tops. Even the new boy Brandon. And Brandon was the fastest runner. But Jeremy used to be the fastest runner, and he thought if he had those black high tops with the 2 white stripes, he could run fast too. Well, he told his grandmother, and she said, "I don't know, Jeremy," because what he really needed was a pair of winter boots. Well, in the story, something happened the next day at school. While he was playing kickball on the playground, the bottom of his shoe just fell apart. Well, the guidance counselor brought Jeremy inside to the office and pulled out a big box. The box had things for students in need, and right now, Jeremy needed a pair of shoes. So he looked through the box, and the only shoes that he could find that fit his feet, that were his size, were a pair of shoes with Velcro and a picture on the side of a cartoon animal. Well, Jeremy didn't want those shoes, but he didn't have a choice. Those shoes looked like something that his young cousin would wear, but he had to put the shoes on because otherwise he'd have to walk home barefoot. And when he got back to class, the other students looked at his feet and began to laugh. Jeremy didn't feel good about that at all. Everyone laughed except one student, Antonio. Antonio and Jeremy were neighbors. They lived right across the street from one another. Well, when Jeremy got home, he told his grandmother what had happened, and she thought it was kind of the guidance counselor to give those shoes to Jeremy. But she can see Jeremy didn't feel good about that at all. So the next morning, his grandmother looked in the newspaper and found a shoe store that was selling those shoes. She told Jeremy that they'd take a trip to the store, and she had set aside a little money, and she'd see if she had enough to buy those shoes. Well, when they got to the store, Jeremy again was disappointed because the shoes cost too much. But then he had a bright idea. He had heard of a thrift store. A thrift store is a place that sells used or gently worn items. And at the thrift store, you can purchase things for less than they would cost when they were brand new. So Jeremy and his grandmother got on a bus and they went to a thrift store. But sadly enough, they didn't have the high tops. They went to another store and another store. And finally, at store number 3, that's where he saw them. The black high tops with the 2 white stripes. He took them out of the window and tried them on. He squeezed his foot inside the shoe, and he looked up at his grandmother, and she said, "Do they fit?" And he said, "They're just a little tight, but shoes stretch." His grandmother shook her head, and she said, "I can't pay money for shoes that are too tight." But Jeremy had saved up a few dollars, and he said, "I can pay for them myself." and he bought the shoes. He took the shoes home and waited a couple of days. And every time his grandmother looked at the shoes, Jeremy assured her, sometimes shoes stretch. Well, his grandmother placed the brand new boots in the closet and didn't say a word, because brand new winter boots is what he needed. So Jeremy went back to school and he played on the playground wearing the shoes that he had gotten from the guidance counselor, because the brand new black high tops with the 2 white stripes were still too small. That evening he played at the park with his friend Antonio, and when his grandmother called him for supper, he invited Antonio to come home and join them. And when Antonio got to his house, he noticed the black high tops. And he said, wow, you've got the black high tops with the 2 white stripes. Why don't you wear them to school? And Jeremy just shrugged his shoulders. Well, after dinner, he noticed that Antonio's feet were smaller than his. He noticed that Antonio's sneakers were taped together and that they were really falling apart. And then he came up with an idea, and he thought to himself, and then he said, nah. But all that night, Jeremy dreamed. He dreamed about giving the sneakers to Antonio. And the next morning when he woke up, he made up his mind. He took the shoes and went across the street and set them on Antonio's porch. And then he rang the doorbell and quickly ran away. And when Antonio opened the door, there were the high tops. Well, that day, when he got to school, he noticed that Antonio was wearing the high tops. Jeremy still had on the used sneakers with the cartoon character on the side, but he was happy that Antonio could fit the shoes. And Antonio was so proud, and all of the other boys looked at him and congratulated him on his new shoes. But something else happened that day. It began to snow outside, and when it was time for recess, the teacher told everyone to put on their winter boots. Jeremy remembered that he had a pair of brand new boots in his backpack, and he put on the brand new boots that no one had ever worn and went outside to play. And all the other kids came outside as well, and Antonio came up to Jeremy and said, thanks, and gave him a fist bump. And that was the day that Jeremy learned the difference between needs and wants. And that's the day that Jeremy became a member of the community who reached out to help others with the resources that he had.
Our last story today is called A Chair for My Mother, written by Vera B. Williams, also illustrated by Vera B. Williams. And it's a story about how when people have hard times, sometimes they can depend on their strong communities to help them out. And that's what a strong community is for. This story is about a girl who lives with her mother and her grandmother. And in the book, the girl tells the story. She's the narrator. And she talks about how hard her mother works. And she talks about how her mother works at a restaurant. She's a waitress, and she's always carrying things, and she's on her feet all day long. And so when she gets home, she's really, really tired. And she tries to relax sitting in one of the hard wooden chairs in the kitchen. But what she'd love more than anything is a big, soft, comfy, puffy armchair. She empties out her pockets of all of the tips, the little bits of money that people have given her. And her mother takes the coins and she puts them into a jar to save them up. And she also talks about how sometimes after school, she goes down to the diner where her mother works. And her mother's boss is a woman named Josephine, and she gives the girl tasks to do, to wipe the tables or fill up the salt and pepper shakers or the ketchup bottles or things like that. And the girl gets paid too, and she puts her money into the jar as well. And they live with the grandmother, And she tells about how her grandmother goes out shopping, and her grandmother is very careful, trying to get the best deal she can. Oh, I bet she probably clips coupons, and she's always looking for what's on sale. And when she saves money, she puts that in the jar as well. She also tells about how it wasn't always like that. She tells about how one day long ago, when she and her mother were on their way home from a shoe store, they got to their street and suddenly they heard fire trucks with those big siren sounds. And they smelled smoke. And as they got closer to their house, they could see the fire. It was their house. Soon, they found out that the grandmother had gotten out okay, and it took a while, but they found out that their cat was okay as well. But the house was totally destroyed, including all of their old soft furniture. It was just turned into charcoal and ashes. The girl tells about how they went to live with some of their relatives at first. First they stayed with them, and then they got a small apartment downstairs from their relatives. But they really didn't have anything at all because all of their furniture and their belongings had been burnt in the fire. But they did have community. And she described how it was on the first day when they moved into that little apartment that they were going to just have for the three of them, and all of the things that the community did and brought for them. She told about how the neighbors showed up with food. There was pizza and cake and ice cream. There were fruits and vegetables. But it wasn't only food. One of the neighbor families brought a table and 3 chairs that they didn't need anymore. And there was an old man who gave them a bed that he had from when his children were growing up. And the girls' other grandparents and aunts and uncles, they brought rugs and curtains. And the boss from the diner, Josephine, she brought things for the kitchen from the diner. Everyone chipped in and everyone celebrated together. And the girl and her mother and her grandmother were very happy and very grateful. But they still didn't have a chair. The girl talks about when her mother got home at the end of the hard shift at the diner, she had to try and relax in a hard kitchen chair. But they kept saving all of their money. Their nickels and dimes and pennies and quarters, they put them all into the jar. And the jar started getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And when it was totally full, they sealed it up and they took it to the store. They went from furniture store to furniture store looking for the perfect chair for her mother. And it was at the 4th furniture store where they finally saw it. It was red with pink flowers and green leaves, and it was so soft and fluffy that when the girl sat in it, she felt like she got lost in it. The money from the jar was just enough, and so they called their aunt and uncle to come with a pickup truck to bring it back to the apartment. When they got it home, her mama sat in it and glowed. And then the girl and her grandma climbed in, and then her aunt took a picture of them all sitting in the chair. And at the end of the book, the girl describes how her grandma sits in the chair during the day and watches the people passing by outside the window. And then when her mother gets home from work, she sits in it and she watches TV. And then the girl climbs up on the chair with her, and sometimes she just falls right to sleep there in her mother's arms. And they don't say it in the book, but I'm pretty sure they don't need that big jar anymore because she was able to get a chair for her mother.
Strong communities, strong communities. The very best places for you and me are strong communities. When we listen, when we share,
Things always go better.
when we show how much we care.
We grow strong together.
Strong communities, strong communities. The very best places for you and me are strong communities.